We are currently 3 stories above downtown San Francisco. My name is Kyle Simmerly. I'm a public information officer with the California High-Speed Rail Authority. This immaculate public park here at the Salesforce Transit Center has been open for a few years and is absolutely gorgeous. You can run around up above the streets of San Francisco. You can enjoy incredible plants from all over the world. Everybody is welcome to join up here. You can bring your, places for picnics and lunch, and it's an amazing space to share with everybody here in San Francisco. And the reason we're here today is because this is the future terminus of California high-speed rail coming into Northern California, along with electrified Caltrain in what is known as the downtown extension. We're going to run the video now of a virtual tour here of the center that is actually led by our Northern California Regional Director, Boris Lipkin. It's a great, quick little sneak peek into all these little nooks and crannies, including the immaculate park we're in today, this little oasis in the middle of downtown San Francisco.
Hello, I'm Boris Lipkin, and I'm the Northern California Regional Director with the California High-Speed Rail Authority, as well as a board member for the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority. Today, we're here to give you a tour of the Salesforce Transit Center, the northern terminus of the California High-Speed Rail system, and the Grand Central Terminal of the West. Let's come have a look inside. So here we are walking into the Grand Hall, and I'm joined today by Neela Gonzalez, Interim Executive Director of the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority. Neela, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Salesforce Transit Center and how this beautiful building came to be?
Welcome, Director Lipkin, to the Salesforce Transit Center, the multimodal 6-story transit hub owned and operated by the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority. As you know, the Transit Center is one of 3 main elements of the Trans-Bay program, of which we've delivered 2, including this iconic visionary destination, the Salesforce Transit Center, along with nearly 4,000 homes with 35% affordable. We're now focused on delivering the downtown rail extension project into downtown San Francisco here at the Transit Center as approved by voters in 1999. The Transit Center includes 6 levels, which encompass the underground train station platform where rail service will be housed, the lower concourse level that will connect to the train station platform, the ground floor where we are now, adjacent to the local Muni bus plaza, and where the Grand Hall is located, where nearly 100,000 riders will pass through daily as they connect to their transit connections when high-speed rail arrives. Second level, that includes office space and wellness services, a bus deck level that is on the 3rd floor that connects directly to the Bay Bridge, and finally the Rooftop Park, the crown jewel of the Transit Center, which is available for visitors to enjoy daily.
Thank you so much, Neela, for having us. Let's go check out the bus deck. So here we are on the bus deck level. We're located 2 stories above ground level, and we're really at the place where the heart of all of the buses for the Transit Center come into the center. Here we have a center island platform for buses to come in with 37 bays around it, where each bus can come in and quickly pull out after dropping off its passengers. But the most exciting thing about the bus deck is that it has a direct bridge connection to the Bay Bridge, so that when the buses coming in from the East Bay don't have to slow down or wait in traffic to get to the Transit Center, saving travelers important time on their way to their destinations. The bus services provided here include AC Transit from the East Bay, the San Francisco Muni service to Treasure Island, WestCat going from Contra Costa County, as well as the Greyhound long-distance buses that go all over the country. Having seen where the buses are coming in today, let's go down to the train box and check out where high-speed rail and Caltrain trains are going to come in tomorrow. So here we are in the train box, and I'm actually standing in the middle of the light column, which will bring natural light all the way from the Rooftop Park down to the lowest levels of the Transit Center. Down here, this is where the Caltrain and high-speed rail trains will come into the Transit Center 2 levels below ground. We'll have 6 total tracks and 3 platforms shared between the 2 systems. Importantly, this will be the connection for the high-speed rail system to the rest of the statewide network. For high-speed rail, our service will provide a connection all the way down to Los Angeles and Anaheim with travel times under 3 hours. It's an exciting upgrade to the existing rail network in California. While for train enthusiasts, this is definitely the most exciting part of the entire Salesforce Transit Center. I think for most people, the rooftop park is really the gem of this facility and of this area of San Francisco. Let's go check it out. So here we are in the rooftop park. And this is truly a magnificent facility for all of San Francisco, as well as the South of Market neighborhood. The park itself covers over 5 acres and provides a variety of sustainable design features. It provides shade for the ground level sidewalks, provides habitat for flora and fauna, helps cool the surrounding environment, and provides important parkland for the neighborhood that this park is situated in. The bus fountain is one of my favorite features, and it's activated every time that a bus goes by on the bus deck. The park provides an open-air amphitheater. It has display gardens from both California and from around the world. There's a children's play area, and some of the more interesting features are the connections that this park has to the surrounding buildings. And having been built together with the large skyscrapers next to it, the park has direct connections to 2 of them through bridges that span both buildings, as well as a privately operated gondola going from the plaza up to directly to the roof deck. One of the more interesting things that we see when we tour around the park is that you can see the connections that are made between the different parts of the building so that it can withstand both earthquakes and other natural disasters. The weight from the rooftop park is actually what holds the train blocks down, given the soil conditions underground in San Francisco. Truly, this is one of those unique places where if you haven't been and you have a chance to visit, I highly recommend it. Thank you very much for joining us for the tour of the Salesforce Transit Center, the northern terminus of the California high-speed rail system. And now let's get to your questions.
Welcome back, folks. We hope you enjoyed that video. Again, my name is Kyle Simmerly. I'm a public information officer with the California High-Speed Rail Authority. We're here at the Salesforce Transit Center Public Park, which you just saw some of in that amazing video. And now I want to introduce the person who was in that video giving you the tour, Northern California Regional Director Boris Lipkin of the Authority.
Hey, Kyle, thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you. And certainly every time I come here, I'm always inspired by this amazing transit facility that also has this major role to play in this neighborhood of San Francisco. And I'm really excited to be here to answer some questions that I'm sure we're getting off from many different sources.
That's definitely true. And Boris just told you, we're actually going to answer your questions live here on several different venues. You can submit questions via Zoom in the Q&A feature, not the chat, the Q&A feature in Zoom. You can submit them in 2 different social media channels. You can submit them on YouTube, which many of you may be watching this from, or you can submit them to a post that was posted on our Facebook page. You can submit comments there. We're collating all of them, and we're going to go through as many as we can over the next hour or so. We're happy to be here and ready to start answering questions for you here 3 stories above the city streets of beautiful downtown San Francisco about California high-speed rail and the future of high-speed passenger rail here in the state and in Northern California. Let's go ahead and get started. Very first question. We actually have seen there are several proposals blended together about how to get the train here to the Salesforce Transit Center. One of them, most notably, is a subway north of Pennsylvania Street. Some of these features are quote unquote nice to have, but it may increase cost or delay timing of the downtown extension, also called the DTX. How will the scope of the downtown extension be determined? How can we make sure that this project doesn't become more expensive like some other regional transportation projects have in recent years? Who is the ultimate decision maker on the DTX?
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. I think that's a great question given where we're at to really get ourselves started with that. So the downtown extension project, and just to help orient everybody, is the second phase of what's called the Transbay program, being managed by the Transbay Joint Powers Authority, which is an agency whose board of directors that I sit on. And the downtown extension would take the rail service from the existing rail corridor and connect it down to the train box that you saw in the video at the bottom of the Salesforce Transit Center. Additionally, there are plans in San Francisco for grade separations at 7th Street and 16th that would potentially extend that tunnel further to the south and grade separate those two key connectors for the Mission Bay neighborhood in San Francisco. Those projects are at somewhat different stages, and they're being certainly coordinated between the two. And there's actually a memorandum of understanding between all the different agencies involved in both of those projects about how to move them both forward. But certainly the goal from the downtown extension standpoint is right now the target is to move that towards construction as quickly as possible. The environmental clearance is complete. And actually at our last board of directors meeting, we approved entry into what's called project development, which is the first phase of pursuing federal funding for a transit project like this. And so it's a big milestone for the program that was literally just I think it was last week was hit. And certainly both the board and the many different agencies working together are very focused on getting that project built as soon as possible.
Thank you, Boris. That's very helpful. I know it's a complex subject. I mean, we've got this transit center here. We're looking forward to connecting to it. Quick question. I'm now curious myself. You know, when was the very first time you actually got to step into this immaculate park, and what was your reaction to it? This tiny little piece of paradise right above the streets.
Sure. I think for me, the first time that I was in the park, I was in the building when it was still being built. And I was in the park when I just got appointed to the board, and it was just before the building had opened. So the construction was basically done at this point, but the building was still in its final touches of construction. And so that was back in 2018. And I remember just standing up here and being able to see San Francisco around me, the neighborhood that had changed so much. I mean, all these tall buildings that have popped up with the coming of the transit center, and just being really excited about kind of what this could mean for transit. And, you know, I think it's always inspiring to see kind of public investment being turned into something that can really be a big asset for both the community, of course, here locally, and of course, you know, across the entire state when we connect it with high-speed rail.
Great. Well, thank you. Next question is actually from Zoom. Thank you out there. What is the timeline for the Central Valley to San Francisco connection? What's the completion timeline for that?
Sure. So in our 2020 business plan, we laid out kind of a phased implementation scheme where right now we have about 119 miles under construction in Central Valley. Our next kind of building block on top of that would be to finish the stretch in the valley to get to Bakersfield and Merced. And then as we were doing that, also start the work to getting to San Francisco. The business plan assumes a opening date in 2031, so about 10 years from now. Now, the thing that's important to sort of course, put out there is not all the funding has been identified for that. And so what we're doing in Northern California right now is making sure that we continue to advance the project. So our next steps are approving the environmental or consideration of approving the environmental documents for the stretch between San Jose and Merced and between San Francisco and San Jose, which would then allow us to begin to move towards construction. The environmental work is expected to be completed in the first part of 2022. So that's really coming up, and we've been working on those for quite a while. And that lets us really start to advance the design, do the geotechnical investigations, and keep us on track towards those opening dates from the business plan. Now, the question that we're going to face eventually is, do we have the funding to do the big construction projects, especially in Pacheco Pass, to get from the Central Valley to the Bay Area in the time when we need it? And of course, you know, those are future decisions to be made. We're going to be making the case that we should be moving that forward on the timeline that we can deliver it on. But those are things that we'll see as we continue to advance. But this is how, you know, any big project really ends up coming together. Is you take a building block, you keep moving the other parts forward, you get additional funding, and eventually you have the whole system built. I mean, we're an example of that here. The transit center's here. We're still working on the rail tunnel. So.
Sure. No, and of course, you talk about phases. If anybody's wondering if they've already seen an aspect of high-speed rail construction going on in their communities here in the Bay Area, Caltrain electrification is going on up and down the corridor, seeing the Canton area and stuff. That's part of this, right?
Right. Yeah. So this is sort of the fun thing about Northern California is we have pieces of the program at every stage of project development. So the center is built. We're moving the downtown extension towards construction. The electrification project, which we are contributing about a third of the funding towards, has been in construction since 2017. They have a couple more years to go before electric trains would start running. But certainly that's, an important component of bringing high-speed rail here is having that corridor electrified. And of course, it provides immediate benefits towards all the commuters that do use that line on a day-to-day basis. And so this is sort of how all the pieces come together. And, it's exciting to both see kind of the components that we're partners in, as well as the things that we're leading ourselves to make the entire kind of statewide network work at the end of the day.
Sure. Thank you. Now a question in from email. What do you say to the skeptics who are angry that 10 years after voting for high-speed rail in 2008, like I did while I was across the bay in UC Berkeley, getting to vote for it 10 years ago, there's still another 10 years to go, at least, before anyone can expect to board a train?
Sure, I think that's a fair question. And I think there is a little bit of what, sort of the Christmas morning effect of, hey, we voted for this thing, why isn't it here? Well, these are mega projects. I mean, everything we do is a series of mega projects that take time, and it's sort of like rebuilding the entire state highway system or the entire UC system. You mentioned you went to Cal, I went to UCLA.
Good job against LSU.
Yeah, thank you. But I think the key thing is it's also a little bit of what was there and how much planning had happened before 2008, and how much has happened since. And I've been working on the program since 2011 in various roles. And what I've seen, I mean, when I started, there were literally 16 state staff managing this project, which is the largest mega project in the country. Right now, we're at about 300, and that continues to grow as we continue to mature the organization to be able to deliver more. And at that point, we hadn't environmentally cleared any of the system. So the design was still very, very early and preliminary. And so in those 10 years, what's happened is probably the largest environmental clearance effort ever and for any project across the entire state. So right now we're approaching 300 miles being fully environmentally cleared. As I mentioned, we'll be pushing that to about 400 in the less than 12 months from now. And then the 119 miles that's under construction today, that's probably the largest rail construction project anywhere in the country. And so while we have more work to do and there's plenty of additional pieces that need to come together, we are definitely very focused on, and one of our first primary objectives is to get trains running as soon as possible, because we do want to show Californians and the entire country what high-speed rail can be, and how it can really start to change how we travel in the state. And so that's very much our focus. I wish we could have it ready tomorrow, but certainly as an agency, our focus is very much on delivering what the voters had asked us for.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned the nearly 300 miles that are cleared. We just cleared those nearly 80 miles, the very first miles into Los Angeles County between Bakersfield and Palmdale very recently.
Yeah, our Southern California regional director is a little bit ahead of us. She got her first section done. We're going to catch up to her in Northern California. So
we're all making progress. A question out there from YouTube. Would an investment in high-speed rail from the federal infrastructure packages that are being considered move up our operations date?
So that's a great question, and we're certainly very excited about the conversation that we see happening in Washington. For much of the last decade, frankly, the federal government has not been invested more in this system. And what we've seen for any large mega project like this is that you need kind of all pots of money to be able to build these things. So the federal government plays a major role. When we were building highways, they were 80 or 90% of the funding at that time. For modern transit projects are usually 30 to 50%. Right now, the federal government is 17% of the funding that we have, so less than 20. And what we're seeing in the federal infrastructure package, both the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate, as well as what was recently proposed in the House for reconciliation, are a variety of different pots. Some of them focused specifically on rail, some on big projects. The most recent one is an additional about $10 billion that we might be able to be eligible for, specifically on high-speed rail in the reconciliation package. And so all of that put together, it looks like if those bills become law, that in the next few years there will be literally tens of billions of dollars that we can pursue. Now we won't get all of it. We will certainly get a chunk, and then that would allow us to stay on track towards meeting those delivery dates, because those delivery dates, again, don't assume that we have all, they don't account to whether we have all the funding or not. And so this is exactly the kind of investment that we need to make in order to be able to meet those timelines and do more, right? So it's all, if you watch the evolution of our business plans, it's all about, what can we do with the resources we have available that we can see and touch, and how quickly can we advance the program and get it all done.
Thank you. The next question's out there from Zoom. When do you anticipate Caltrain and California High-Speed Rail will start being based here in the Salesforce Transit Center? This gets back to the completion date potentially, but when specifically do you anticipate Caltrain and High-Speed Rail being based here in the Transit Center? Sure.
I think the current schedule that the team is working on has a opening date similar to us, around the 2031 timeframe. So about a decade away. We have a few years of still kind of project development work, right-of-way acquisition, and then the actual tunneling construction to get that done. So there's active work happening to move that project forward. And we're certainly excited to be a partner in that exercise.
Sure, sure. Speaking of mega projects, what's the status of Link 21 and the potential second Trans-Bay crossing? How will that impact Salesforce Transit Center?
Sure, that's a great question. And it's always exciting to see sort of the planning horizons on these mega projects start to change, where Caltrain electrification was an idea for a long time and it's now being built. High-speed rail, similarly, we talked about what it was like in 2008 or even a little bit later, in terms of how much had been done. Well, Link 21 is sort of the next big idea, and it really comes from a couple of different needs where, BART has their existing Trans-Bay tube, which is approaching 50 years old, and is certainly the critical link of that system. We also see a lot of intercity demand for travel between the entire kind of Northern California mega region, 21 counties in Northern California. And so what the partnership between BART and Capital Corridor are working on is a potential second Trans-Bay crossing that would be able to be either both BART and Capital Corridor or conventional rail, or one or the other. They're still working on those details. This is still in pretty early stages of planning, so there's still a lot of work to do. But certainly one of the exciting opportunities, and from what the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority is doing, is working very closely to make sure that one of the options that they'll be exploring is whether they can come in from the east and basically use the same train box where our high-speed rail and Caltrain trains are going to be down in the basement of the Salesforce Transit Center. So there's more work to do on sort of the engineering, the planning, the delivery, but it is a very exciting project, and it, frankly, in terms of scale, it's probably one of the ones that can match high-speed rail's ambition. And so certainly big benefits on hand, and a very important connection that can be made for all of rail in Northern California, really.
No, that's very exciting. Of course, as a Bay Area native, originally myself, it's really exciting to hear about a potential second Trans-Bay crossing when so much traffic comes through the first.
Right.
And also really cool to hear the word said out loud about, is there some sort of potential future eventual connection here to this train box? This is a common question, and thank you to the person out on Zoom who asked it. How can I, that person specifically, respond to critics who say the project is, quote, a boondoggle and will only go between Fresno and Bakersfield? By the way, Fresno has a lot of people in it. yes, it's larger as its own city than Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans, not by metropolitan area, but it's a large city. How I want to support high-speed rail and I want it here. So, how can I respond to critics in this way?
Sure. I mean, I think the way that, to talk about some of that is, look, from our standpoint, the mandate that we got from voters is to start with a system from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim. And that's what we're doggedly pursuing. Along with the way, if we're building things, we want to put them into service. And what that means is that when we have 119 miles under construction, we want to put that into rail service, provide benefits as quickly as we can. It doesn't mean that that's the end of the road for high-speed rail or the end of the ambition. And certainly, I'll say as the Northern California Regional Director, I'm very interested in having the system built here, and our Southern California Regional Director does as well. And so I think it's a useful step, and this is sort of, again, similar to any big mega project. Our initial step is just larger than most other projects, but certainly the program is continuing to advance to deliver that entire statewide vision, and I think that vision is still correct today as it was back in 2008, if maybe even more so. The reasons that Californians voted for Proposition 1A to begin with is we really can look at international systems, and where they succeed the most is when they can cover distances in that sort of 100 to maybe 500 or 600 mile range, because that's where they have big travel time advantages against cars and planes. And that's the geography of California. Our major cities, whether it's the Central Valley connecting to the two coastal areas, whether it's the Bay Area to Los Angeles, those are the distances between our cities. And so we know that these systems work and that they can draw a large share of passengers. And when they do that, that means a few different things. One is we're taking cars off the roads, we're reducing VMT, which is our biggest emitter in California, is our personal automobile. Of course, we're also taking planes out of the air, which that's the harder sector to decarbonize. And so we're really this is one of the components of tackling our aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets in the state, and moving people towards both development patterns, hopefully, that can be more sustainable, as well as providing new economic opportunities. I mean, today, getting from Fresno to San Jose even is, a 3, maybe 4 hour drive, depending on what happens on 152. With high-speed rail, that becomes a 1 hour trip. Getting to LA from the Bay Area becomes, something that you can do, on a regular basis in a way that you can't today. And so, I think the way to talk about those things is that, the vision that was laid out by voters is still right. And I think it's seeing the progress, and I think there has been, tremendous amount of progress in delivering on that vision. And again, I don't think that's just limited to the Central Valley as its own kind of end state of the program.
Certainly. Yeah, no. Thank you for that question out there. Next up, a question from Zoom. And I'll ad-lib a little bit on this. They're interested specifically on how the transit center was built to mitigate against any hazards with regards to earthquakes, which we're all very familiar with here in California, all parts. But also maybe also an opportunity to talk about high-speed rail and how we're preparing for earthquakes as well, as it'll definitely affect us. Sure.
Yeah, those are fun questions. And I guess I'll just preface that I'm not a structural engineer, so I'll do my best with the explanations here. But of course, everyone is aware, and there's large engineering teams that are focused specifically on seismic issues, in that we are in earthquake country. And for the Salesforce Transit Center in particular, one of the key things is that this center, as you've seen from the video, and if you visited here, it's 3 blocks long. It's a huge building. What it looks like is one giant building, but really there are at each block intersection, it's essentially 3 buildings all tied together. And part of the reason for that is for seismic issues, in that if there's an earthquake, that's a much more stable and safe environment. In terms of our system, one of the things that we're doing is developing of course, planning for earthquakes, one, but also an early earthquake monitoring system. And so we've seen this in Japan when they had their really big earthquake in 2011 that ended up with unfortunately the nuclear disaster there with the power plant. Their high-speed rail system, which had dozens of trains out on the system at that time, all the trains, their earlier earthquake detection system worked. All the trains slowed down. And there was basically no issues for the passengers or anybody else. And it's just one of those components that you plan for, and you make sure that everything is safe for passengers. And certainly that's a big focus of how we're designing and ultimately building the system in California.
Absolutely. We're all getting acquainted with here in California early warning systems. So that's really exciting to hear about. Next question in from YouTube out there. What requirements, what would need to happen for high-speed rail to expedite and potentially have any part of the system operational by the 2028 Olympics? Everyone's thinking about Olympics equals infrastructure investment. Is there any way that sort of expediting of the process could happen?
I think that's challenging. I mean, I certainly don't want to be over-promising things that can't, are unlikely to happen. I think if that was truly the target, and we would identify a particular portion of the system and pursue the resources and the construction methods sort of to do everything as expeditiously as possible? Maybe, but I think that would likely carry a higher price tag than sort of delivering under normal circumstances. And certainly that is, while the 2028 Olympics is exciting, and I wish we could have all the high-speed trains in the world ready for that, I think realistically, that's one that we will see other investment in. And I think if you were following some of the state budget negotiations, there was a proposed investment in the transportation package towards improving transit for the 2028 Olympics. But I don't know that we will see high-speed rail by that point.
Thank you. Another one in from Zoom. When the system is fully operational, how many trains estimate per hour will arrive and depart at this terminal? Are 6 tracks going to have enough capacity for both high-speed rail and Caltrain? They list a comparative example. New York City's Penn Station has 21 tracks. Grand Central has more than 40. Yes, we wish we had 21 tracks.
More tracks is always good, though. I will give a counter example, which I think is the Tokyo main station has 4 tracks. So, and they have much higher levels of service than that. So and part of what they do is they turn trains very quickly. But the plan for high-speed rail at Salesforce Transit Center is consistent with our agreements on the entire Caltrain corridor, is actually to run up to 4 trains an hour north of San Jose, and so getting to the center here. Caltrain's plan after electrification is to be at up to 6 trains an hour in the peak, and then we've done planning looking at if continued growth of Caltrain service, and the center can accommodate up to about 12 trains an hour, so a train every 5 minutes between the 2 systems. So 4 high-speed and 8 Caltrain trains can use the center at the same time. And so, we certainly see that's quite a bit of service. There could be other trains that would go in other places, but for high speed, for intercity rail service, that's seems about right.
Cool. Thank you. We're about half an hour into our event here. Just a quick, reminder, if you have a question, you can submit questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom. We're also keeping track of them in email, on YouTube, also on Facebook posts we put up. We're keeping track of all of them, and we're trying to get to as many as we can. We apologize if we can't get to all of them. We know everyone's really excited about this opportunity, and we'll just get back to it just to make sure we have as much time as possible. Quick question about private partnership. This is from YouTube. Thanks out there. What kind of private partners are being engaged to build high-speed rail? And are there any lessons that we, California, the state, the authority, that we're learning on how high-speed rail has been built in other countries?
Sure. I mean, there's a variety of private partners working on the program, and ranging from certainly private partners who are helping us manage the program. Of course, the contractors are all private entities. I think what the question is really maybe getting at is, whether we're pursuing what's called a public-private partnership, where the private party would take on kind of more and more of the responsibility. And one of the, there's a few different components to that. Certainly, one of the things that we're looking at as part of our track and systems and our rolling stock contracts are a combination of sort of the design and the building of those systems, as well as the long-term maintenance. So that's one role that a private partner would have in the long-term phase of the program. The other one is, of course, around operations. And what we see internationally, and what we see for our system, as we really get to mature operations, that will be a opportunity that should be commercially successful, and that can provide interest for private partners to potentially offer something like a long-term concession, where they would take on operations for a couple of decades or something to that effect, and in return provide a investment for the state to use to expand the rest of the system. We certainly see that in examples from High Speed 1 in the UK and other systems, that opportunity can exist with high-speed lines, but we really see that kind of the concession version of it at a later stage once we're in operations. But certainly the expertise that we have, both at the public sector, we need to be the owners and managers of the program, but a lot of the delivery is certainly done by, of course, private contractors. We're not the ones hiring construction workers directly to build the system.
Thank you. That's helpful. Very specific question, actually, to the San Francisco to San Jose section. Could you talk a little bit about the light maintenance facility that's planned in Brisbane? Sorry. What's the timeline for construction of that light maintenance facility?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the kind of among many different components of high-speed rail in San Francisco, San Jose, that section is a little bit unique because we do have the Caltrain electrification project, which is making a lot of investments that will be able to allow for high-speed rail to run on the corridor. But there are some components that we need just for high-speed rail. And so one of the ones that you mentioned is a light maintenance facility. In Northern California, we have there's three key facilities, one in Southern California, one in Central Valley, one here in Northern California. That facility, we're looking at two different options, either on the east or the west side of the tracks in Brisbane. On the Bayland site, the preferred alternative has it on the east side, and we'll ultimately make a decision about which side or whether to approve the project in about a year, a little less than a year from now. From there, the kind of next step is to continue to advance the design, do more kind of investigations of that particular site. It is a challenging construction site for us. Ultimately get into right-of-way acquisition and then ultimately construction. So the goal would be to have that ready, so basically finished in time to start service to San Francisco. So that's again, about 10 years out. That means that construction, would likely start in, about 3 to 5 years from now.
Thank you. Another question in from YouTube. Thank you out there. When will California High-Speed Rail acquire train sets?
Ooh, good question. So we have had basically a draft of our RFP for the train sets that we went out to industry with a few years ago. Right now, kind of the key decisions that we're trying to make is first the track and systems contract to actually build. Basically, right now, the construction that's going on in Central Valley is all the civil works. So basically everything under the tracks. That track and systems contract is the next one to put everything above the tracks on there. So the rail itself, the electrification, the communication systems, et cetera. And, soon following that would be the rolling stock contract. Now there are, as again, folks who are following the program, lots of conversations happening with the legislature over the last few months, and then that'll extend into the new year about that electrification in the Central Valley and that contract. And so we need to get those resolved and get some decisions made, and then we can obviously we would like to move forward with the rolling stock contract soon thereafter.
Sure. And those trains would need to be tested in the Central Valley. The Central Valley and the structures and right away we are creating are the only such place in the entire United States where you could test at sufficient speeds, correct?
Right. Yeah. And I think this is the question that often gets asked about, well, why did construction start in the Central Valley? And one of the components is if you want to have high-speed rail in California with what the voters had asked, 200 miles an hour faster trains, the only place where you can test that is in the Central Valley. It's the only place that's long enough and straight enough and has those maximum speeds to be able to do all the safety certifications, all the testing. So that part is essential, essentially, to be able to get high-speed rail anywhere in California. Now, there are kind of existing places in Pueblo, Colorado, for example, where you could test at 160 miles an hour. That's the maximum speed there. But that is kind of one of the hard things about going first, is that we have to build our test track and then put it into use as we get going in service. I mean, I think just to give a little local example, I was reading, there's a recent book that was published about the history of BART, and they're similarly, we're testing new technology, bringing a new system online, and they had their test track. I think it was somewhere by Mount Diablo, kind of out in the East Bay. Of course, that was just a component to get the trains running. Their first stretch was, I think, between Fremont and Oakland. But of course, over time, it became the system that we see today, which spans the entire Bay Area. And I think there's certainly some useful lessons in how that happened, and that you can apply to high-speed rail.
Sure, thank you. Question in from email. Thank you out there. Is the train going to be able to operate on its own without the need for a public subsidy?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And, again, it comes back to a little bit of, sort of what the view from the voters was in 2008, as well as some of those questions of, how do we see kind of the ridership potential, the commercial potential of the system. And again, starting kind of international examples, we generally see that on an operating basis. So not talking about the initial capital investment that's usually made by the public, but on an operating basis, that these systems do make money from operations. In the analysis that we've run, sort of in looking at these questions, what we generally see is once we've connected two regions of the state, so for example, the Bay Area and the Central Valley, or the Central Valley in Southern California, that's enough to attract enough riders and basically be operationally in the black. In the Central Valley, for that particular connection, what we've talked about is if we do run some initial operating service there, is that there's existing rail service that is subsidized by the state on that stretch. What we could do is provide a lot more service, reduce that operating subsidy for that operation, get better service because it'd be faster and of course cleaner. It's not diesel, it's electrified. And so we certainly see the benefit of that as an interim step, but we really see the bigger ridership potential and the bigger commercial opportunity once two regions of the state are connected.
Right. And that's why we're moving ahead with all of our environmental planning in the Southern California and the Northern California regions with plans by 2023 to have the whole 520 plus miles environmentally cleared. Question in there from Zoom. Thank you so much. What is the target timeline? And this gets back to DTX. This question may have been answered a little bit, but I'm going to ask it again.
Okay.
What's a target timeline for the tunnel construction, either to start or to finish? It's not clear here for the transit center, the DTX.
So I think the finish is, I think that's a 2031 date. I think the start, this is testing my memory here a little bit. So I think I'm going to ballpark it, and I think there's precise information on this from the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority. So I will recommend the questioner kind of go and check out some of the materials there. But I believe it's mid 2020s for start of construction in order to meet that timeline.
Perfect, thanks. Let's see, how about, this is actually getting close to link 21. That's a question in from email, I believe. What's the status of trying to get, and this is a great question, what's the status of trying to get Capital Corridor, or other interregional rail service into downtown San Francisco, and that one-seat ride potential between Sacramento rail yards and the Salesforce Transit Center?
Sure, yeah, I think that one, so as a formerly much more frequent rider of the Capital Corridor, of course, for those who know that system, it goes from Sacramento through Emeryville and Oakland, and then down to San Jose, but it doesn't come into San Francisco directly. You have to take a bus or take BART across the bay. And so the plans that do exist is tied to Link 21 and making that connection across the bay through another Trans-Bay tube or similar structure. So, that work is in early stages of planning. I think they are just starting their kind of what they're calling, I think it's phase one now is the early kind of what should be the alignments, what are the markets, kind of looking at those kinds of questions, and then starting to get into the design and then ultimately environmental clearance, et cetera, of the system. So it's still a little ways away, but certainly, there is interest in making that interregional connection as well as the BART. Additional BART service and capacity in the two.
Putting on our future glasses here, let's say DTX moves faster than we expect. Would Caltrain come in before high-speed rail could?
Yeah, certainly. Part of the goal for from the perspective of the transit center is to get trains in here as soon as possible. I mean, there's the bus is already here, and we just need to get the trains going. And so certainly from high-speed rail, we want to be here the day that it opens and have the high-speed trains there along Caltrain. But if the tunnel is completed and Caltrain is ready to start service, certainly we would want them to begin serving the center. And then, of course, part of what has been thought about is sort of making sure that there's accommodation for the high-speed rail trains when we do get here if DTX gets finished first.
That's great, thank you. Has the connection with ACE train in Merced, does it make sense to concentrate on connecting to Southern California prior to Valley? And maybe this is an opportunity to talk about the connection that's already there down in Bakersfield.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's, as we look at sort of the construction in the Central Valley, that what we've talked about is a span, kind of extending them from the 119 that we have 119 miles today to cover the entire Central Valley stretch from Merced to Bakersfield, and then have a tie into both the ACE service and more, even equally importantly, the San Joaquin service, which is a service that runs from the Central Valley to both Sacramento and Oakland as a key kind of unified connection in Merced. On the southern end of the corridor, what we see is the opportunity to increase and improve the bus connection to Southern California. Right now, kind of at least in pre-COVID times. And so the San Joaquin trains have about 1 million riders a year. Roughly 400,000 of those would be taking the bus connection from Southern California to get to Bakersfield and get on the train. We see some opportunities potentially to either increase some of that bus service and or create another rail connection sort of further north from some of the existing rail services, either the Surfliner or the Metrolink service down in Southern California, again, to start to shrink the state. Certainly getting kind of across the gap in rail service in the state between Bakersfield and Palmdale is a big deal. It's a critical link for kind of the entire statewide network. We, as you mentioned, I think just cleared that environmentally. So we have a specific design, we have approved plans that we're ready to keep that project moving. That section is a challenging one. It has, a lot of, because it's a mountainous area, it's got tunnels, large structures. So the investment needed to get across that gap is quite large. So certainly we're very interested in advancing that. And we see that as one of those key linkages because Palmdale also offers us the connection to Brightline West service potentially going out to Las Vegas, as well as, of course, Metrolink going to other parts of the San Fernando Valley. So big opportunity there, also big investment needed.
Right. It's great to hear about all this potential for interconnectivity. And actually, that is related to a question that came in from YouTube. I believe this is referring to Brightline West. Is there a possibility for Brightline West trains, I'm assuming, to run on this California high-speed rail tracks starting at Palmdale, or would there be a transfer?
Yeah, so we're certainly working very closely with them, and we have an MOU with them as well as the State Transportation Agency and Caltrans, sort of about how we can help bring that service to California and ultimately to Palmdale, and then have that connection. We're very focused on both those technical aspects of making sure we can have through running and, to ideally have the opportunity for either them to use our tracks or us to use their tracks potentially even. And so, that's certainly the goal and the intent. But, we're continuing to advance the planning in order to make that happen. And ultimately, we'll see what the right arrangements are between, whether it makes sense to have people transfer onto the statewide system or to have their trains continue onto our tracks. I think those are big questions that I'm sure we'll get to, but those are still a little bit in front of us.
Well, as a Bruin, you probably appreciate I've started to stray south. Obviously, Northern California Regional Director Boris Lipkin. Again, we've got about 10 minutes left in this live virtual town hall Q&A. There are a couple of options for you to submit questions with the last little bit of time we have left with the regional director. You can submit them via the Q&A feature on Zoom, which you may be watching us through right now. You can actually submit it through a YouTube comment as well, if that's where you're watching this stream, or you could also submit it on the Facebook post about this Q&A. We're collating all of them, trying to get through as many as we can, and we'll just get right back to it. So having strayed south, let's go very north now to specifically a question about if high-speed rail goes underground at 16th and 7th, would it bypass the 4th and King station that currently exists?
Well, I think that this is sort of that question coming back to where we started in the beginning of the hour, talking about the downtown extension and the Pennsylvania Avenue extension, which would project which would provide that tunnel connection. And so presumably, if what we're talking about is a scenario where the downtown extension is complete and Pennsylvania Avenue extension is complete, so that's where the tunnel starts under 7th and 16th, then what our plan would be to serve the Salesforce Transit Center, and then on the way in the DTX project, there's a station at 4th and Townsend, which is right next to the 4th and King rail yard. And so in that scenario, we would just serve obviously all the trains would stop at Salesforce Transit Center. Some trains might also stop at 4th and Townsend on the way to serve sort of that southern part of the Soma neighborhood.
Sure. Trying to get as many questions as possible. I'm going to merge a couple here. Have there been discussions with President Biden, with Vice President Harris, with Secretary Buttigieg, with, say, the honorable representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Seth Moulton from Massachusetts and from New York, respectively? Have there been conversations with them trying to get them to, understand where we are, what we're doing, how much is left to do, how much we have done?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, the change that we've seen, just from, let's be really frank, last year, the federal partnership was radio silence, where, under the previous administration, they were not very supportive of the project. We actually were in litigation with them over some funding that they tried to take away. That changed almost, 180 degrees with the start of this administration. And so what we have is regular contact with certainly the folks in the administration, the US DOT, as well as some of the members of Congress that you mentioned. They, specifically the two representatives that you mentioned, wrote a big letter with many other co-signers, about 75 of them, pushing for more investment in high-speed rail specifically. We've also seen both the president, the vice president, the secretary of transportation talking about the important benefits of high-speed rail. And I think the secretary talked about sort of the need for the U.S. to both catch up and hopefully lead the world in some of these kinds of programs. And so we definitely see those as very promising conversations. I think those conversations are turning into the bills that we're seeing in front of Congress right now that do provide substantial investment opportunity. And certainly we are making sure that California is well represented, and that the federal administration and partners across the country know where we're at. And I do think we have a little bit of a unique advantage of being further ahead than most other projects in the state, because we the head start that the voters gave us back in 2008 and the investments that have been made so far, where, as these things mature, I do think we will be in a very competitive position for any federal funding opportunities that come about.
Probably enough time for 3 more questions, folks. What's the status of the famed Google development around San Jose Diridon Station? A modernization project, some discussion potentially about a people mover to San Jose International Airport. Completed Diridon project is projected to be larger potentially even than the Salesforce Transit Center. Of course, the Salesforce Transit Center, we can look, see, and touch. How does it look relative to Diridon?
Sure. It's great to have a chance to talk about other parts of the corridor. Obviously, it's great to be in San Francisco, but we do have a big region with many different connections. And Diridon Station and what's happening there is also very, very exciting. As I think the questioner mentioned, Google has purchased, I believe it's about 80 acres of land right around the station. And they really view that as a big opportunity to create a new neighborhood for the area. So it's not just a office park, it includes housing and other investments, open space, et cetera, and really stretching the area of downtown San Jose towards the rail station. And certainly the existence of the rail station, that rail hub, was one of those critical pieces of why Google has decided to locate there. They got council approval for that project. I believe it was earlier this year. So they're moving the first pieces of that towards construction. The other thing that's exciting and happening at Diridon Station is, as I mentioned, we kind of across Northern California have pieces of the program at all stages of development. And so we have our plans of how do we modify the station to add high-speed rail to it. And this is relatively modest modifications that we need to run high-speed rail service to and through the station. And that's in at the environmental clearance stage. We're looking to bring that to our board in early next year. But at the same time, we have another partnership with some of the local agencies. So the city of San Jose, Caltrain, the Valley Transportation Authority, and MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, to really look at a even bigger vision for that Diridon Station and how all those transit services can be an integrated hub for both high-speed rail, Caltrain, ACE, Capital Corridor Service, VTA, light rail, and bus, the connections from Monterey and Salinas and other places. And so that project is at a still fairly early stages of planning, but it's exciting to see those big partnerships form that have been the successful basis of how this transit center came to be, and really how what it takes to bring some of these big projects forward. And that one, of course, has a great opportunity to really reimagine some of the land use around it with that Google project coming in as well.
Absolutely. Well, folks, this has been a whirlwind of an hour here in beautiful downtown San Francisco with Northern California Regional Director Boris Lipkin. We've reached the end of our time for this opportunity. One last question that's near and dear to my heart is, what can people out there watching do to make high-speed rail real?
Sure, I think I love that question. That one is, we always need help. While we have the responsibility to advance the program and advocate for it, a lot of the best things that people can do is be our advocates and help us with that, both with elected representatives, both in Washington and in California, certainly, as well as help us with moving the project forward, give us ideas, give us, how we can make it a better program. I think we've always had deep investment with our communities, and they've made this project better over time. And so get involved in our, sometimes we have local community working groups or others, get involved with some of the advocacy, and of course, keep following the program and seeing the opportunities to talk to us more, interact with us more. So we certainly appreciate that, this project has had lots of support. It's also, let's be frank, it has always been controversial. And so the more that we can show and talk about sort of the vision and the support that vision has, it certainly helps us move the project forward.
Well, thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for being here, folks. We look forward to the next time we get to take your questions and answer them for you. Until next time, Kyle Simmerly, Public Information Officer with the Authority, and
Boris Lipkin, Northern California Regional Director. And as a last thing, for those who are observing tonight and tomorrow, I hope everyone has a good fast for those observing Yom Kippur.
of course, absolutely. And stay safe, everyone. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.